Really honored to have you all here, and I'm delighted to introduce you to the panelists for this second session. First of all, I would like to introduce Dr. Jarostaw Cwiek-Karpowicz, Director of the Polish Institute of International Affairs since December 2024. He graduated in political science and sociology at the University of Warsaw, a fellow of the Foundation for Polish Science. In 2010, he received a PhD in humanities at the Faculty of Journalism and Political Science. In 2019, having collected substantial scientific records and defended his thesis, Energy Security of Russia, he obtained a social science PhD in the field of security science at the Faculty of Political Science and International Studies at the University of Warsaw. Staff member of the Institute of Political Science and the Polish Institute. He is an economic counselor at the Polish Embassy in Riga and Tel Aviv, head of the Political and Economic Unit at the Permanent Representation of Poland to the OECD in Paris, an author of international relations, energy, climate, and public opinion publications. He speaks fluent English, French, Russian, and basic Hebrew. Welcome to Tego Monterrey. Ambassador Jennifer Feller is a career member of the Mexican Foreign Service since 2003. She currently serves as Director General for Human Rights and Democracy at the Mexican Foreign Ministry. Her diplomatic career includes key roles in Mexico's embassies in Portugal, France, and the United States, as well as leadership positions within the ministry's multilateral and human rights portfolios. She holds a degree in international relations from the Universidad Iberoamericana with a specialization in international law, a diploma in political science and international relations from CIDE, and a master's in humanitarian assistance from ISCTE University Institute of Lisbon. Amy Glover, she serves on the board of the Mexican Council of Foreign Relations, COMEXI, and is president and founding partner of Arriaga, a strategic communications and public affairs firm based in Mexico City. With over 25 years of experience, she has advised multinational corporations and held senior roles at McCarthy Associates and the American Chamber of Commerce in Mexico. A recognized expert in U.S.-Mexico relations and North American economic integration. She holds degrees from Georgetown University and Johns Hopkins, and Glover is an alumnus for Millennium and Mexico Today, a gender diversity advocate through 2020, and Women's Board in Mexico. Dr. Víctor Arriaga, he's currently the editor of Expediente COMEXI United States, a daily publication by the Mexican Council of Foreign Relations, COMEXI. He is an international affairs specialist by training, holding a bachelor's degree in international relations from El Colegio de Mexico and a master's and PhD in government and international affairs from the University of Virginia. He pursued his graduate studies as a Fulbright scholar. In academia, he has served as a research professor and at the Center and Research and Teaching Economics at CIDE, as an adjunct professor at El Colegio de Mexico and a university, and a member of the Mexican National System of Researches. In public sector, he held various positions at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Health, and Energy. He was a member of the Mexican Foreign Service with postings at the Mexican embassies in Austria, Cuba, and the United States, as well as the Consulate General of Mexico in Dallas. His most recent position in the Foreign Service was head of press section at the Embassy of Mexico in Washington, D.C. So, welcome you all, and we're ready to start this conversation. I think, can you hear me there? Yeah. Our previous session gave us a lot of comments to take from there, and it's clear that the world is facing a transformation. Tomorrow will be 100 days really since the arrival in office in this second term of President Trump, and we have seen the most destabilizing period, not only in American history, but clearly, as our previous panelists spoke about, the world in general. So I would like, there's lots of uncertainty, turbulence, shock, some of our previous panel talk about. And I would like to ask you, Dr. Jarostaw, what would be your prospective scenarios then, given this polarized, uncertain world, in terms of the role of the EU? What would happen in terms of unity? Would there be impact in political stability? And hence, what would be the strategies to strengthen and build partnership with other countries in the world, and clearly this new configuration in the European scenario?
Well, thank you very much. I think there are many questions, and I try to be very brief. First, you are completely right, what I understood, that Trump is challenging Europe very much. We may say, I am speaking not only as a Polish citizen, but also as a European citizen, let's say, that we are much less dependent economically from the United States and Mexico, but we are very much dependent politically and in the sphere of security and military. So the first challenge for us is the threat that there will be less US soldiers in Europe. Now it's about 100,000, and it's already now. It was announced that probably 10,000 US soldiers will be dislocated from Europe. So this is exactly the number of soldiers being in Poland. So we really hope in Poland that this, let's say, decrease of numbers would take place in other region. But nevertheless, it's an issue. Of course, US support to Ukraine is the same, as well as undermining NATO. For us, NATO is a very effective organization. It's a good mechanism with a huge US contribution. So that's why politically and militarily in Europe, we have to think about some, not alternatives, but rather about some so-called European pillar or European proposal, and showing Americans that we are a reliable partner. Also, in terms of defense spending, as you perfectly know, Trump very often asks us to increase the percentage of GDP of spending for defense. He's talking about 5%. Nowadays, United States is spending less than 5%. Poland is what was already mentioned, and our number is 4.8%. But Spain, and with all respect Portugal, it's a little bit less than 2%. So we always will struggle to decrease the number of percentage of GDP spending on defense, showing Americans that we're a reliable partner and we can secure our sovereignty, let's say. So this is in terms of how U.S. policy now is posing some problems for us. Economically, it's true that European Union is less dependence. I think that there's a position like wait and see, like that European Union may also adopt tariffs, not sanctions, tariffs on US, but we are waiting and we are prepared for some negotiation. However, there are already some fines launched against US tech companies. And also, e-commerce is a sphere of tensions between the European Union and the US in the future for sure. But there's also some negative signals in terms of our common values. I'm having in my mind the J.D. Vance speech in Munich, when he criticized Europe very much, and pretty much at the same time, the new US administration supported very much some right-wing radical parties in Europe, like AfD in Germany, or a Romanian candidate in the upcoming presidential elections. In Poland, we are facing presidential elections in the late May and beginning of June this year. So far, we didn't notice any negative signs or some American pressure, but the competition between candidates is very strong now. So we are very careful. What does it mean for U.S. administration that we do not share the same values? And this is something what I maybe will leave for my second intervention about common values and like-minded countries. And because someone mentioned already the India position and Mexico's position, so maybe I will stop now, but really I would like to have something about our, let's say, common understanding and also our approach towards international order and values of democracy and free market economies in the time when US position is not so much clear. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. And I think Dr. Joseph gave us a clear link to our next question in terms, yes, there's a major issue on security, defense, but I think there's other issues that we really need to incorporate into our discussion. And the previous panel mentioned a lot of these crises on multilateralism and the need to rethink of the role of international organizations, to think about how what role international should play with these different strategies. And I'd like to ask Ambassador Feller, human rights. I think we tend to forget about this, and I think there's crucial issues, and the international system, right, of human rights. How would this turns, how this twist going from one side to another, when there's clear major signs of downturns, of drawbacks in terms of human rights, and major victories that were, struggled for ages, today are clearly on risk. What is your perspective, Ambassador?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here in this panel and also share this table with Dr. Jarostav and with very good friends. Thank you so much, Hector and Ambassador Agnieszka for this, and of course, Ambassador Rosenthal, always a pleasure to see you. I think that something that is quite important about this kind of fora is the possibility of actually listening to each other. And I have always said that Mexico and Europe, we share the same values, but we don't share the same history. And that's where many of the perspectives on how to address the strengthening of multilateralism, the promotion of human rights, sometimes is maybe not very well understood. I think that it was President, the Chairman Kowal, who said before how important it is to actually listen to different perspectives and to engage more with each other, because we have so many more things in common than the obvious. It is not a surprise, I think, for anyone that this administration of Trump started with a major sweeping attack against the human rights international order. This was already, we had already precedents. He had already in 2018 disengaged from the Human Rights Council. In 2020, he had already imposed sanctions, for instance, to the ICC members. So this is not really a surprise. I think the surprise is how aggressive this new administration is actually acting against the universal rights order that we had built since after the Second World War, and of course the existing avenues for accountability of anyone who actually violates this international order. So we are looking after the executive order on February 4th, who actually orders the Department of State to make in 6 months a general review on the membership of the U.S. To international organizations, which includes, of course, the UN. Although I don't think that the U.S. is going to disengage completely from the U.S. because it has a main interest of remaining as a permanent member in the Security Council. But this review of the international organizations and the review of its membership to international treaties. is actually something that we hadn't seen before. And of course, a major change, Doctor, you had already mentioned the Munich conference speech, which represented a major turn away from the traditional alliance, transatlantic alliance, but of course the vote of the US on the 22nd of February in the General Assembly on Ukraine. And what you see there is also, when you see the pattern of vote on this resolution adopted in the 22nd of February, what we can actually, I go back to what Ambassador Ruiz Cabañas was saying before, there is no Latin American vision, but something that you can see is that there is a major alignment between many Latin American countries and Europe on principles, on values, on what we think should be defended. So we are faced with two, I think, major things regarding the human rights system as a whole. One is actually to defend what we have achieved. And I think this is going to be a major challenge both for Europe and for a country like Mexico, in the sense that we have to manage our interests, our bilateral interests with the US, which exists. And this is like something that we cannot get away from. But at the same time, to manage our autonomy and independence to defend what we have fought so much to defend. And this includes the possibility of actually openly talking about what we don't agree. So we have to recognize that the current international human rights order is also biased, that it also has been implemented with double standards in the past, that sometimes or many times the interests of the most powerful have prevailed. The US has been, a huge champion, of course, on human rights during the last decades. It has helped to build the current governance order. It has allowed us actually also to build many of the core treaties that we are part of, but at the same time, it has had a foreign policy that has been selective and very pragmatic in the past. And we have to talk openly about that. And I think this is not the place to talk about it exactly, but this is also what influenced the position of many countries of the global South on Ukraine. So that is one part. I think that we have to defend what we have achieved. We have to defend the principles that are now in peril, as, for instance, and this is not new. This didn't come with Trump. The weakening of values as territorial integrity, sovereignty, but also the use of force to come to a resolution of conflicts, the attacks, undiscriminated attacks against civilians, against hospitals, against schools, how torture, how racial discrimination is becoming something a lot more common than we would want to be. And the other thing is actually how we can work together. And this, I actually was looking into how we vote, Poland and Mexico, in many of the resolutions on human rights in the multilateral system. And we have, a very high score of similar votes, but we never speak. I think we take a lot of what we do for granted. And this dialogue, this open dialogue, this honest dialogue on how we can actually rebuild from this crisis also something better is something that we have to do as well. So how we can actually speak more openly about migration, for instance, how we can have a not politicized dialogue on things that are important and are actually affecting all of us. So I'm not going to take more time, but this is more or less, basically my conclusion is to defend, but also to work together to continue to open opportunities on many things that can come from this crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam. Amy, in terms of this new scenario, right, and thinking about this need to think about new alliances, new partnerships between countries, who would be able to potentially create this new construction, in terms of coalitions, in terms of these common values and common interests to confront the current scenario?
Sure. You want to pass?
Sorry.
I may not need the microphone. First of all, I just want to clarify, I'm a Mexican citizen, and this year I'm celebrating 20 years of Mexicanidad. I take my I take my citizenship very seriously, and I will be living here forever. I'm never moving back to the United States. So you're stuck with me. Yeah, we're living such dramatic moments, no doubt. And I think Mexico and Europe will have a hard time understanding that the U.S. as we knew it no longer exists. And I think that's something, as a binational, I grew up in the United States, studied there, and I went to high school in a place that's very much kind of a Trump country place in Sparks, Nevada. So I understand very well both the history of the United States, which the country was built on slavery, and it wasn't a minor amount of time, over 200 years, the implications that has. And I think the tendency in Mexico and in Europe is to think, oh my God, but the U.S. is so important. They're gonna come back to their senses. Well, don't plan on it. I think we have to come to the conclusion that we need to very, very quickly strategize and come up with new ideas. And certainly Mexico has a commercial dependence. Europe has a military dependence. Mexico also has a history of conflicts with the United States. I mean, half the territory was taken in the 19th century, something that all Mexicans know and very few Americans are aware of. So, we definitely, I work with the business sector, and I see many in the business sector trying to think, oh no, but the U.S., we're going to try to convince them and we're going to try to negotiate. Yeah, we have to do that because, as Ambassador Feller points out, geography is destiny. The U.S. market will continue to be important for Mexico. But there's two treaties that are very critical both to Mexico and to Europe. One is USMCA, or TMEC as we refer to it here in Mexico, and NATO. Both of these agreements, the basis and the most valuable aspects of the agreements are certainty. Certainty and a certain confidence, well, not a certain confidence, a completely committed confidence that the rules in those treaties will be abided by. And I think that no longer exists. So I think both for Mexico and Europe, that's a big problem. I think there is already a question, does the U.S. want to be part of NATO? Does the U.S. want to exercise that leadership? I think from the perspective of the Donald Trump White House, the answer is clearly no. America first means America first. And it's a zero-sum game, and the United States wins at every game or they throw a fit. So that's who you're dealing with now. And this is not just Donald J. Trump. This is a very sophisticated, ultra-right-wing movement. This is not the Republican Party. This is MAGA, Make America Great Again. And this is the implementation of Project 2025 that was painstakingly put together by the Heritage Foundation, an ultra-right-wing think tank in Washington, D.C. They have a plan, and they're going to implement it. What could potentially make him back down? The markets, we've seen some of that, and then, the poll numbers. Americans who voted for him thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't vote for this. Well, there you go. The educational system ain't great either. So what are the implications quickly, for the United States? And this is very important because from a global economic standpoint, the U.S. continues to be the most important economy in the world, along with China. What will be the implications of this change of heart on many issues, including free trade, democracy, innovation, and diversity? The U.S. is going to lose competitiveness, and it's going to be big. Turning its back on free trade, terrible idea. I'd like to know who in the United States wants to work in a factory or work in a mine. Doesn't sound like a lot of fun to me, but who knows? I don't know. Maybe there's some young, intrepid students at the Tec de Monterrey that find that an interesting possibility. I highly doubt it. The U.S. always, the shining democracy, light on a hill. The U.S. is, as we speak, violating human rights. And they're violating the human rights primarily of Latin Americans, although not exclusively. There are 2 people being held in a jail in the state of Louisiana without any charges against them. By the way, if you ever hear the saying in English, he was sold down the river, being sold down the river during slave times meant you were sent to Louisiana. Why was that a raw deal? Because Louisiana is one of the most violent and, prejudice-loving states in the Union. So they're there. That's a violation of human rights. Who's going to do anything about it? I think we're very calm, given the fact, of what the gravity of the situation that we're facing. Science and technology. The U.S. is going. There was a really good short piece that Fareed Zakaria put out on CNN about after 100 years of leading in science and technology, in 100 days, the Trump administration is putting this all into question. Why? Because guess what? Having immigrants is a competitive advantage. And the U.S. has benefited greatly from accepting immigration from all nations. And that's why they have such, good universities and whatnot, as pulling in the best talent from around the world. Well, if I wouldn't want my son studying in a university in the U.S. When it comes down to this kind of terror, who wants to send their children to the U.S.? It doesn't sound very attractive to me. So that's going to have a huge impact. As a matter of fact, there was a poll of scientists taken. 75% say they're considering leaving the country and going to Europe or Canada. So also, too, as Mexicans and Europeans, we need to think about attracting that talent. Mexico needs to up its game in that sense. And we need to work with Canada because Canadians are a lot smarter than Americans. And we will see that result in the election today. And no, they don't want to be the 51st state. I think it's been interesting from a Mexican standpoint. It's been beneficial that Trump has attacked so many because we're used to being the punching bag, but now we're just one among many, and frankly, no nos ha ido tan mal. No. It's been a lot worse for Europe, a lot worse for Canada. So, I think it is absolutely critical that we discuss in very, very concrete terms how we can work together, what exports we can send to Europe, what new ideas we have, because thinking that we're going to go back to the way it was it's over. So we need to move on.
Thank you. Víctor, Mexico. Mexico is not anyone's piñata.
And the closest and most valued partner, do you think President Sheinbaum's strategy?
Cold-headed, wait and see, as Dr. mentioned, is it the right way, or should we be thinking about new possibilities, new ways, new bridges, new paths for collaboration?
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, before I answer your question, I'd like to commend COMEXI and the Polish Institute for International Affairs for organizing this event. I think whenever two countries that share not necessarily the same history, but perhaps the same geographical circumstance in terms of asymmetries of power, in terms of borders with powerful neighbors as middle countries, there is always, a lot we can learn from each other, and that's why I think the dialogue, as Ambassador Feller was mentioning, is very pertinent at this time. So, in terms of the strategy that Mexico or the Mexican government has followed, and in this regard, this is not obviously an official point of view, this is my personal interpretation. Clearly, there is a lot of attention that is being addressed to the response of Mexico to what has been the major upheaval of the bilateral relation in recent history. Because one cannot identify, one can see that all of the aspects of the bilateral relation between Mexico and the United States have been affected by the arrival of Donald Trump. And you can think in terms of trade, you can think in terms of security, you can think in terms of migration, obviously, but also in terms of border issues, in terms of even export of cattle. Yesterday, we heard that there's the threat of the cattle market being closed by the United States due to the hookworm disease. So all of the aspects of the relationship have been affected, and one of the main principles of the relation, which it hasn't always been perfect, but there was this idea of non-contamination of tracks. You had the pigeonhole of trade, you had the pigeonhole of security, you had the pigeonhole of migration. Try to avoid contamination from one area to the other. That has not necessarily always been the case, but at least during the Biden administration, that seemed to be the approach to follow. And also, certainty was another aspect, which was clearly something that we more or less got used to in the past 4 years. But at this point, all of the areas of the relationship are contaminated by threats, and clear threats that if you don't deliver your debt of water, as in the case of the debt of water that Mexico has with Texas, we will impose a tariff. If you don't fix the sewage system in the Tijuana San Diego region, you will have a tariff imposed on you, you will receive a tariff sanction. So all of the areas of the relationship at this point have been affected by these threats. But on the other hand, and the international press has clearly identified that the Mexican response, at least by publicly by the Mexican president, is something that strikes as you mentioned non-confrontational approach, she has not necessarily become engaged, in public, questioning publicly President Trump. So this is something that strikes the attention of international observers. Is this an effective strategy? Are we doing much better than other countries are doing? Amy said, no nos está yendo tan mal. We're not having such a bad experience in terms of other countries. But as I said, all of the areas of the bilateral relationship are affected, and there is always, the threat that if you don't do this or you don't do that, you will receive a special tariff. And at this point, we're not. This is not the case of China that has, 145% tariff imposed on its exports, but we have automobiles, we have steel, aluminum, we have non-compliant exports of Mexico on USMCA tariffs imposed as well. So I mean, there is something that needs to be negotiated there, and at least I have not seen publicly, a response, as has been the case of Canada, or has been the case of the Europeans, or obviously the case of China, that that we will retaliate to commercial sanctions or to commercial tariffs that have been imposed by the United States. I mean, that has not been clearly, the strategy that has been worked by the current government. And there's always, this idea that wait, we will perhaps arrive to a moment when we will perhaps have something to say. But clearly, I mean, at least from an observer's position, we don't have a list of items that are going to be, there will be an imposition of a tariff on a specific product of the United States, or there will be a specific tariff addressed to a region that is clearly, Republican and will be feeling, the bunch of Mexican tariffs on its export. So, I mean, there's a wait and see approach, and to what extent this can go on forever. I mean, we can think in terms of this can be extended, for a long period of time, and we will constantly be receiving, the Mexican side will be constantly receiving threats. So, I mean, at some point, I would think it would be, important to take, a more clear stand on certain issues, and to clearly point out, that at least, with tariffs, we have some. At some point, we will be retaliating. The other point that struck the comment by Dr. Jarostaw in terms of the shift that Europe is seeing in terms of security, and in terms of less, as you mentioned, Dr. Jarostaw, less U.S. soldiers in Europe. Well, we're seeing quite the opposite. Mexico's border is being clearly militarized. We have an increase of military presence in the northern border. As one of the first things that President Trump did in terms of his executive orders when he took office is to instruct the Northern Command, to increase its military presence in the southern border to collaborate with migration enforcement. So this is clearly another change, another shift in terms of the relationship, because in the past, most of the enforcement was done by DHS, by civilian corporations, but now we have a clear presence, a strong presence of military U.S. military forces in the northern border of Mexico. So that's also something which is a major change in terms of our bilateral relations. So you also asked Dr. Glover to mention in terms of international alliances, in terms of what could be some strategic steps countries could take in terms of the response to this new world order, or what is becoming a new world order. It does strike me as well that at least at the regional level, Mexico has not followed, a strategy of approaching and, having a common response with the other partner in the North American region regarding issues of USMCA, and that's something which really should make us, raises a lot of questions even on the future of North America as a region. Clearly, Amy said that the U.S. is going to go alone is going to be going alone on many issues. So North America, perhaps we have to think in terms of different ideas as to this region, and also in terms of the potential alliances with other countries. It seems very difficult at this point to have a common response, and one saw this at the summit of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, which was held in Tegucigalpa just a couple of weeks ago. I mean, when you look at the declaration and the fact that not many presidents and heads of states showed up, and not many, and even some of the countries that showed up did not endorse, the declaration that was taken. I mean, and there is no clear message, as one can see, regarding, Latin American relations with regards to the Trump administration, that really raises a lot of questions as to the extent, there is actually the possibility of following, common approaches to this new world order. So I would, leave it at this.
Thank you, Victor. I think it will be a good time to open up for the audience to participate. We will take a couple of questions and then we get another round of participations here.
Hello, thank you very much for this wonderful panel. And I am Cwiek-Karpowicz from the University of Veracruz. And I really want, do you hear me? Yes?
Yeah.
I want to ask you, for you, what is the most important matter that Mexico must address with priority in this global contest? Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much for being part of this panel. My name is Mayra Gomez. I'm an international relations student from the Tecnológico de Monterrey. And I want to ask a question regarding, for example, the commitment for the environmental protection that Dr. Víctor previously mentioned about what is going to happen within Mexico and the United States bilateral relations in terms of the protection of the river of Tijuana. Because we have seen that these weeks and a lot of years that they have been creating spaces for dialogue for this topic. However, they have not achieved a mutual agreement within a common responsibilities in this area. And regarding the acts, for example, of Donald Trump, of the climate change, the acknowledgement of the crisis, what is a common approach that we could have between both countries in order to have a mutual agreement of securing these environmental threat between both countries? Thank you.
Anyone else?
Thank you. I was wondering if in Poland, are you aware of what's happening between Mexico and the United States? I mean, because part of what we're seeking is, I guess, both parts seeking a partner, even if it's just to do a little bit of group therapy and get it off our chests that our main partner has changed so much. So I wonder if in the media or the academic field in Poland or in the rest of Europe, are you actually following what's going on? And would you be willing to have a conversation about, well, this is what's happening to me and this is what's happening to you. Should we do something about it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, of course. I mean, I think that the very first decisions or statements made by Trump was to impose tariffs on Mexico and Canada, and it was widely discussed in Poland that okay, they are first in the queue, and we would be probably the next. So, and there was lots of sympathy towards Mexico and Canada. So I think that to take all these questions and add something from my side. I think that during especially the first session and also the second, for me it's the first time in Mexico, right? So I see some hesitation among Mexicans whether Mexico should be a very, say, neutral, independent country or very much connected to the, let's say, global north, right? To the like-minded country. And I'm extremely grateful that you mentioned the last resolution in UN against Russia when Mexico voted together with European Union, and many countries abstained. So that's why I would like to give you, my main message for you from Poland is that definitely we would like to see you as a like-minded countries. We have many arguments, you have many arguments so far, and we can go further, even further. So I'm sure that you know that we are both member of one organization which was not mentioned yet. It was called Economic NATO, or Club of Rich Countries, and your compatriot, Mr. Gurria, was Secretary General for 15 years. So it's OECD, where I had the privilege to serve as a charge d'affaires for some time. And we are both a member of OECD. It's a quite important economic organization of like-minded countries, where US now is behaving very strange, right? so that's why if you would like to conclude our session with some concrete recommendation, definitely I would suggest to be more active, our two countries. There are many other European countries, a few from Latin America, Costa Rica, Chile, and Colombia. So it's not by chance that Argentina and Brazil is still waiting as a candidate, not a member. Yes, so I think that definitely we should do something more. We didn't mention also EU-Mercosur trade agreement, which also, it was also a challenge for, especially for agriculture sector in Poland and France. But I think we should. So far, the Polish position is that definitely we should follow this track.
And EU-Mexico.
Yeah, and EU-Mexico,
yeah.
of course.
Of course, the level agreement.
Sorry.
No.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Just maybe going back to your question, I think that something for Mexico, there has always been a huge link between our international commitments, human rights commitments, multilateral commitments, and our national reality. So there are both factors that are very important for Mexico. The first one is that the way to balance our disproportionate relationship with the US has always been through strengthening and enforcing the multilateral system as a whole. That's why we have so many contributions in international law, of course, and nuclear disarmament, as it was mentioned before, and in many other areas, human rights as well, migrant rights as well. And the other thing is basically, since '98, we started like a gradual process, of course, that had already initiated before, but clearly since '98, of integrating our international responsibilities, human rights responsibilities specifically, into our national legislation. No? How we can actually see the change in Mexico through our multilateral and international participation. And I think that now it's very clear that the US administration is not going to invest in strengthening the international order. It is not going to invest in I don't think that even in new organizations. It's basically going, rather than a global order that actually constrains the great power privilege, it's aiming into a mercantilist view of international relations. And our main priority as Mexico should be to actually work together in order, as I was mentioning before, to preserve what we have had. And this is beyond ideologies, and this is something that probably makes this partnership with Europe even more important, and to work with Europe even more important in these very specific issues. This is not about if we agree on sexual and reproductive rights or if we agree on a gender perspective. I think that we all know, even if we do agree many times on these issues, but I think that it's also very clear that in Europe you have an advancement also of far-right movements. And I think that Mexico cannot forget that as well. So I think that we have to go back to the basis, to principles. So I think that both conservatives and liberals in Europe and in Mexico, of course, we agree that we are better off with a strong international multilateral system where there are accountability mechanisms and where we can actually have more predictability, as Amy was saying. So we have to work together in order not to lose that, because the US, I am hopeful, will come back in a few years. And we lose in that process is basically very important. And the chaos or conflict that will come from this era that we are living now will depend on how loud we are in defending what we believe in. So that's basically it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you. Yes, in terms of what Mexico needs to do at this moment, I really do think, and it's a tall order, economic diversification, because it's not something that happens from one day to the next. But I do think we need to look more openly at options. And this is perhaps a somewhat controversial opinion. I do think we need to look at how we can work with China on some things. I mean, I think certainly the comparative advantages of China and Mexico are very similar. So we actually don't have a very deep relationship, unlike some countries in South America, given the fact that there was a lot of kind of extractive relationships based on commodities and whatnot. But there could potentially be some investments that could behoove Mexico, and that China, we could work with them on that. I think, interestingly, China is fashioning itself as the more rational player now, even though we know, China's not a democracy. China also has human rights violations issues. There was this recent discussion of climate change without the United States. The next COP will be in Brazil. There was a discussion with the EU, with China, about what to do. There's no doubt, and we haven't mentioned climate much, and I will leave the specifics to the river to Víctor. But there's no doubt, too, climate issues are also a competitive issue. China has the lead on renewable energy. The fact that the U.S. is going to turn its back on that, turn its back on electromobility, yes, eventually, I certainly hope as well, the U.S. will come back to its senses. However, it will be a different country at that point, and it will have lost competitiveness. So that's an important thing that Mexico has to understand too. And I, again, going back to the private sector, this is very hard for the private sector to accept. It's probably more easy for diplomats and politicians to accept. But the private sector is all in terms of the cadenas productivas. And again, it's very difficult to decide, okay, how, if we do want to look at Asia, we do want to look at Europe, there are a lot of costs related to logistics. Some of these markets are not as open. So there are things that we have to assess. I do want to mention, however, too, Mexico needs to strengthen itself internally, too. There's an excellent reflection published by Santiago Levy recently about the lack of productivity in the Mexican economy. That's something we need to look at seriously. That may require fiscal reform. Mexico needs to invest more in infrastructure, health, and education. And that's something we've tended to look at the U.S. That's the problem in the U.S. That's why the U.S. is dysfunctional, is because of the lack of a serious safety net, which is currently being completely torn apart by Trump and Elon Musk. We need to look at Europe and social democracy as a way to create bienestar, because we need to be stronger internally in order to be able to compete internationally.
Thank you, Amy. Víctor.
Just a few final comments, final remarks. I mean, specifically, this case of Rio Tijuana is very revealing in terms of narrative. It's very easy to put the blame on one side and perhaps overlook, that the U.S. is overdue as well in terms of its commitments in San Diego, in terms of rebuilding and a couple of installations, for the treatment of waters. And this was clearly something that happened. I mean, I was following very closely the rhetoric of Selden, who's the head of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, saying that it wasn't possible to continue, with the situation in Tijuana, where in the Tijuana-San Diego region, where the sewage from the Rio Tijuana contaminates, passes the border and contaminates the American side. So the Mexican government asked the Minister of the Environmental Resources to travel to San Diego and to meet with Selden. And clearly, when they got together, she pointed out, well, we've already completed phase 1 of our agreement with the treatment plant of San Antonio de los Buenos, and we still have a few more steps to take regarding a couple of additional sites. But what about you? Well, we have plans to finish in 2030. Well, if you have plans to finish in 2030, obviously, you will continue receiving, water that's not fully treated, and there will be a contamination problem on your side. And then Selden took, at least publicly, made the commitment that he was going to pull, the date, the deadline to 2027, so that the U.S. will already complete its part of the commitment in 2027. And this clearly also reveals that there is a deficit on the U.S. side in several aspects of the bilateral relations that need to be addressed, and that's clearly where diplomacy and the ability of sitting down and pointing out well, rhetoric aside and narratives aside, let's see what each side has fulfilled. So I think that's a very good example of how to use diplomacy in an intelligent way. Now, regarding the potential that you have of as a country, as Mexico has, of using the international regime, the international rules to support your own position. Here it does strike me as something that has been missing in terms of the Mexican government's response to the U.S. tariffs throughout these recent months. When you compare it to the Canadian response, you clearly see that Canada even went over to the World Trade Organization, and presented a complaint. The United States is not meeting, with its agreements in terms of tariffs, in terms of most favored nation clauses. So there is a complaint in WTO, and unfortunately, at least publicly, I don't know if that's not the case. Otherwise, there hasn't been something comparable, by the Mexican government using, an organization that has been created to eliminate tariffs and to deal with trade issues, to use it as a tool, to strengthen your position. So that's why I say at some point, you have to move from the non-confrontational stage and even use, those tools which are available from the international order to support, your position.
Thank you. Well, it's time to close our panel. Thank you so much for each of you, your contribution to this discussion. I think it will be a good time to continue with the third panel, Mexico and Poland's place in the head of EU and Latin American relations. So I think this is a great start. Thank you all.